As one can imagine, within the realm of pagan talk and witch talk and associated categories, there's a lot of arguments. Some of these arguments could be easily solved by knowing one thing, and that one thing is called convergent evolution. As you can see here, it is when two things that are not related can develop similar features or behaviors independently from each other. They could basically evolve the same way. Now, I'm using this term specifically because I don't know if there's a term in like sociology or anthropology or anything like that to describe how this happens within cultures. Because sometimes two unrelated cultures that did not have contact with each other have similar ideas, even traditions. One of the arguments that I think this could easily be solved like this for is unfortunately a pretty heavy one, and that is the jumping of the broom ceremony that happens in at least two cultures. This was a common thing noted for Celtic hand fasting ceremonies, but is also heavily connected to marriage ceremonies done by slaves in North America. And I've seen a lot of arguments about especially this for a lot of impassioned reasons that I don't inherently disagree with. But there is absolutely no evidence that one person, like one culture, got it from the other, nor is the other people talking about it from their cultural perspective lying. There is also possibly a third culture that does this, and that is the Welsh Romana Chal, which are a Romani group in Wales. So obviously the Celtic traditions of jumping over the broom and handfesting may have been a borrowed tradition from them, but and while yes, if you share a complexion with me, you probably should be wary of how this tradition is very similar to, the traditions of those who are descendants of those who were once enslaved. But the argument doesn't need to be a no, you're wrong situation. Because no one is. The tradition exists independently from each other. I also personally really hate arguments around pyramids for this kind of thing. Pyramids show up in many cultures. It must all be aliens! Or the resources that people had were very similar, and pyramids are a very fine structural shape. Similarities don't inherently mean connections. Now, I obviously hate specifically with the pyramids that this tends to be like attributed to POC, like, oh, they would have never been smart enough to do this. Which is WS, let's be honest. But I hate the thought that in general, humans wouldn't have been smart enough to do this. Our ancestors weren't dumb, guys. And I'm sure there's just a ton of other examples that I could use, but those are the two most prevalent that I can think of that come up pretty often. Sometimes similarities within cultures happen because they happen. And specifically the jumping of the broom situation is definitely iffy because, again, a lot of white people, especially white spiritual people within occultic spaces, have a habit of appropriating from hoodoo, which is inherently, a culture in of itself that is based on being descendants of enslaved African Americans. But in the specific case of the jumping of the broom, there's evidence that it was done in, Celtic countries, especially Scotland, as I said, may have origins in Wales. And the possible connections to the Romana Chal are, also a thing that should be discussed, but that's a theory. Something we should be mindful of, but not something that we have enough actual documentation on for any case one way or the other. But these should be conversations, not arguments. As much as that's possible, especially on this app.